Thank you all for being here today as we come together to celebrate the achievements of our seniors and to discuss admissions trends from this past application cycle. My name is Peter Davos, and I'm the founder and CEO of Hale Education Group. I stand here before you today having been transformed by my academic experiences that have spanned 2 continents and more than half a dozen universities. As a second-generation hyphenated American, the son of Greek immigrants, neither of whom had the opportunity to study in university, I am a living testament to the power of potential and the life-changing effects of education. If you dream big enough, work hard enough, and have the support of the right people in your life, you too can achieve your dreams. I was privileged enough to attend some of the world's leading universities, including Johns Hopkins, the London School of Economics, Oxford, and Harvard. At Harvard, I graduated top of my class as class marshal, and have since served as a senior marshal at 3 separate commencement ceremonies. As a member of both the Johns Hopkins and Harvard GSD alumni councils, I served a critical role with fellow distinguished alumni to help shape university policy. My educational experiences have defined the person I am today, and now I get to help define the journeys of the students we work with every single day. Almost 12 years ago, I founded the first educational consultancy in the GCC focused exclusively on U.S. university admissions. My vision was built on ethics, transparency, and helping students find the right fit. At the time, and still to this present day, the higher education advisory landscape is dominated by agencies, some of which disingenuously present themselves as independent consultancies. The essence of their business model is to send students to universities that pay them placement fees or commissions. They're incentivized to send their students to the universities that pay them the most. Leading universities in the US, Canada, and Europe do not engage in such practices. Neither do we, and neither will we. Furthermore, when I founded Hale, I did not want to make promises that I could not keep, fabricate false personal narratives, or reverse engineer student success based on an esoteric formula that only I had access to. While other consultancies boast of their student successes through nebulous claims that cannot be verified, Hale has built a reputation based on transparency and consistent local student success for over a decade, year in and year out. There has never been a black box, secret strategy, or insider information that will grant admission to a student. The secret to success lies in developing an authentic, personal narrative based on academic interests and passions, presenting it in a compelling way, and going above and beyond inside and outside the classroom, something we help students do amazingly well at Hale. I am proud to celebrate another year of student success after an application cycle the New York Times described as peak college admissions insanity. Thanks to the wonderful Hale team, which has doubled in the last 18 months, we were able to deliver on another set of stellar acceptances to our students. For the 3rd year in a row, we had 2 undergraduate acceptances to Stanford University, the most selective university in America. Those students will be joining us on stage today. For 11 years in a row, Hale students have secured at least 1 undergraduate acceptance to Stanford. Last year, 2 of the 40 international students accepted to Caltech were Hale students, and the only undergraduate acceptance to MIT was also a Hale student. Our students have been accepted to all 8 Ivy League universities and the most competitive universities in the world. We are also very proud of our Hale Scholars Pro Bono initiative, which has sent deserving students to Harvard, Dartmouth, Chicago, Columbia, NYU, and Brown on full cost of attendance financial aid scholarships. One of our Hale scholars, Mohammed, from Syria, will be joining us as a panelist today. No other educational consultancy or agency dependent on referral and placement fees claiming to be an educational consultancy can match our track record of success. With an average of over 6 university acceptances per student, $9 million awarded in scholarships this year alone, and annual acceptances to the Ivy League and most selective universities in the world, the one constant in every application season is Hale students continue to deliver year in and year out. We are a homegrown company, not backed by private equity, that has always placed the needs of our students and their families first. We have not only grown our team, but we have expanded our offerings. Hale now has dedicated counselors for the UK, Europe, and Canada, allowing for students to benefit from the same level of application support that they have for the US. We have invested in securing the most compelling SAT curriculum and digitally adaptive SAT exams that no one else in the region has access to. Just this year, we had 3 students score perfect 36s in the ACT, 2 of them in their second year of GCSEs. We continue to go from strength to strength, leading the pack, always setting the gold standard in university admissions regionally. Before we welcome the students on stage, I'd like to welcome some of my colleagues and all-star counselors to share a brief set of observations, insights, and experiences from this last admission cycle. I'm so proud of all the wonderful work they've done in unleashing the potential and transforming the lives of their students. Please join me in welcoming my colleagues on stage, Ukasha, Aisha, Bilal, Shafiq, Sam, and Hishan. Thank you. How's it going? Good. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. So I'm going to ask just a few questions to shed some light on what peak university admissions insanity looks like. This was the most difficult application cycle in decades. And I think it would be great if, Ukasha, we started with you. What were some of your key observations and takeaways from this past cycle?
Thank you for that question, Peter. I think that's a great way to start the conversation. Welcome to everyone who's here. Thank you guys so much for coming. So there were a few major themes for me this year. I think perhaps the most notable being the increase in applications this year. There was a 7% increase in applications across the board. On Common App, in whole numbers, this translates to an extra 500,000 applications. What I found particularly interesting was that, in the hyper-competitive universities, such as the Ivies, there was a stabilization of the application rates. For some, there was even a dip. For example, for Harvard, there was a 5% dip in applications. And then there's the highly selective universities, but perhaps not as selective universities. Let's take, for example, New York University, or NYU. It received 120,000 applications this year. This is a 13% increase from the year prior, a 50% increase over the last 4 years. And it experienced a halving of the acceptance rate from 16% to 8%, which for me as a counselor who's managing students, these are striking numbers. And we saw this with other universities as well. Let's take, for example, USC, or University of Southern California. It experienced an increase in applications from 60,000 to 80,000, another halving of the acceptance rates from 16% to approximately 9%. We can see this reflected in other universities as well. For example, Boston University or Northeastern University. Applications have gone up by 50% as well over the last 4 years. And their acceptance rates have dwindled all the way down to a mere 7%. Statistically, technically, this makes these universities harder to get into compared to some Ivies. So that was striking for me. And secondly, the recent Supreme Court decision, for those of you who are unaware, this meant removing, or the Supreme Court decision was to remove race as a contributing factor in making an admissions decision on acceptance or rejection. Initially, this was celebrated by international students as they thought this would lead to greater representation for them. But admissions officers had other ideas in the way that they wanted to execute this policy. So what they did was they used this policy to benefit perhaps underprivileged students a bit more relative to the international students who comprise most of the privileged students that attend U.S. universities. So, and in line with this also, there was a change in the makeup of, the way that applications are structured. Supplemental essays changed their form in order to assess better students' abilities to overcome adversity or personal challenges. So, and this is why we also saw a really big increase in deferrals from early to regular, because admissions officers were reserving the early cycle for the absolute most competitive students and perhaps the most deserving ones. So there was a lot of changes across this past year, longer odds, more difficult circumstances for international students. but Hale students pulled through, and you guys will hear from them shortly.
Amazing. Thank you for your insights, Kasha. Aisha, what crucial advice would you give to students who are applying to top U.S. universities today?
Thank you, Peter. So I believe the first and foremost, students have to look at finding the right fit, right? How do you do that? So you visualize your 4 years over in college. You visualize that over a 4-year process. You begin by scouring the necessary websites, whether it's Big Future or Niche, to better understand campus culture. You can check out U.S. News and World Report for recent rankings, if that's something that's really important to you. Visit the college websites and then revisit them to become familiar with the curriculum and see what the academic department has to offer you. You can take a virtual tour to get your bearings. You can research financial aid, clubs and organizations, study abroad programs, and what kind of recruitment opportunities you will have once you graduate. That's something that's really important as well. Only once you gain the valuable insight of which colleges you best align with your interests and values and ideals, will you be able to convey that effectively, both verbally and in written form. Another important piece of advice, of course, is to aim for quality over quantity when it comes to your extracurricular involvement. You don't have to join every single club that's offered in your high school. If you're not athletic, you don't have to join a sports team. If you're not creative, you don't have to pick up an instrument or a paintbrush. Hone your interests, target your passions towards creating a compelling narrative that's personal to you. Quality, I think, involvements are much more impressive than having a long list of superficial involvements. And finally, I think invest in your summers, make the most of them. They offer a rare opportunity for students to dedicate a significant chunk of time to a specific activity, whether it's a specialized biomedical research course or doing a shadowship with a doctor if medicine is your field of interest, or, the initiation or completion of an impactful passion project. Whichever the case, I think in sum, just invest your time wisely and make informed decisions. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Hishan, you were raised in Dubai, and you were even featured as an Ivy Insider panelist in 2019. What unique challenges do you think Dubai students face in this process?
That's a great question. Thank you, Peter. I think it's important I start off by providing some background as to my history in Dubai and my student profile. So as Peter mentioned, I've lived here my whole life. I went to Dubai College, which is a British curriculum school where I studied GCSEs and A-levels. And I was a very business-oriented individual, fascinated by the worlds of entrepreneurship, finance, innovation. I loved to play basketball, competing both inside, outside of school, for academies like MPAC. But much more than that, I think after GCSEs, I realized that I wanted to apply to the States. I went to a very UK-driven school, and I was a bit late in the process. And now in hindsight, I joined much later than I should have. But my school is very much driven on sending, 85, 90% of the student body to top UK institutions. And I felt that I aligned much better towards the US college experience. So the first challenge that I came across is something that I think a lot of Dubai students face, which is a knowledge gap of elite US institutions. I think the biggest disparity is there's this huge discrepancy on what is required and what is expected of students looking at these top US schools. For instance, I can take A-levels, as that was my personal insight. If you are allowed to take 3 A-levels and then apply to university, that isn't necessarily what you should be doing, right? The most competitive applicants are looking at 4 A-levels plus an EPQ, which is weighted at another half of an A-level. There's also the whole process of selecting the right university. We at Hale encounter Dubai students and parents every day that really start and end the conversation simply only talking about Ivy Leagues. And obviously, yes, they are elite US institutions, but there are other top schools that may be safeties or targets that rank top in the country that may be a much better fit for the student and their profile. So this leads me into the last point about the knowledge gap, which is a strict over-reliance on rankings. As Aisha mentioned, it's not all about looking at, what has the top global ranking or what has the top academic reputation. There are so many more factors to consider. Right? It's about doing your due diligence, doing your college research. It was only after, months of delving into Cornell that I realized that it was the right fit for me. I studied the FISC guide, I went on a campus tour, I registered for information sessions. I eventually came to the conclusion that that would be my home for the next 4 years. But it's a process, right? So the Hale experience, is an active process of discovering yourself, your life, your likes, your dislikes, environmental preferences, your aptitude for certain subjects. Ultimately, it's a process that takes time and a lot of effort, which is why we encourage students to start the process sooner rather than later. And that draws me to my second point, which I feel like a lot of Dubai students can relate to, and that's differentiation, right? The last thing we want to do is fall into that pothole of a Dubai kid cliche that spends half their essays discussing their multicultural background because they're in a city surrounded by expats, because quite frankly, all of us here today can say the exact same thing. It's not really differentiating you. So it's about cultivating a unique narrative, a unique story that highlights your personal growth, your character development, and shows these admissions councils that you're ready for the trials and tribulations of higher education.
Thank you for sharing your personal insight and experiences. Bilal, you were lucky. You studied both in Europe and in the US. There seem to be an increasing number of high school students drawn to Europe for their undergraduate study. What is causing some of these trends?
Thank you, Peter. That's a really great question. We have definitely noticed that more and more students are becoming interested in studying in Europe or a combination of Europe and the US. There are a lot of reasons for this, but I've noticed 3 main reasons. The first one being affordability and being closer to home. If you're a business student or a student interested in business, you're going to be paying less than half the cost at IE Madrid, for example, which is a leading business school in Europe, in comparison to Wharton or BU's Questrom School of Business. So these are also really great options. The second main reason is cultural exposure in Europe. You get exposed to a lot of different cultures, languages, traditions, again, at a very young age. And no matter really where you live in Europe, you're always going to be very kind of close by to different European cities. And recently they've even established a direct train from Amsterdam to London in less than 4 hours. So you don't even have to get on a flight. You can just go places. And that's something that's a really great experience at that age. So if you look at someone who's living in Amsterdam, for example, you can get to Paris in 2.5 hours, Brussels in 1.5 hours, London in 4 hours. So that's definitely a factor. The final reason is duration of studies. Undergraduate programs in Europe typically run about 3 years. So that's a great option for students. For example, if you're interested in business, Bocconi offers one of the best business programs in Europe, and that's a 3-year program. If you're interested in hospitality, for example, you can go to EHL in Lausanne, Switzerland, also 3 years. So really great options, especially again for students that are not ready to make that plunge to the US just yet. A combination of Europe for undergraduate and a master's program in the US could be very beneficial. I personally benefited a lot from this combination as I studied in Europe for bachelor's, and then I went to NYU, my dream school, for my master's. And something that a lot of people don't realize is the amount of scholarships available for master's applicants from Europe or applying from Europe. I was able to get about $300,000 in scholarships, which is not a number that I would have thought I would have been able to achieve. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities.
Does the undergraduate approach to education in mainland Europe differ from that in the UK or the US, Canada?
Definitely. That's also a really great question. There is a big difference in terms of curriculum flexibility, for sure. If you look at the US, most undergrad programs are liberal arts colleges that allow you to really pick and choose your major. You can even apply undecided for the most part if you really don't know what to study. However, in Europe, they do require students to pick their major from the beginning and follow a mostly strict structure in terms of studies. The combination of unlikely majors is not really that possible generally. If you are to study 2 different majors, they're usually more closely related, such as business and economics, for example. There are, however, some Dutch universities for the last 30 years that have been implementing a really great format of residential liberal arts colleges in the Netherlands. And the reason these are really great is because it gives students the opportunity to experience a more American-style education in a more traditional residential college environment in Europe. So that's also one of the benefits. One of our students, shout out to Shreya, was accepted to one of these programs, so definitely really proud of her. And this is when counseling definitely comes in hand, because these programs can be quite selective. So the top 3 in the Netherlands, for example, Utrecht, Amsterdam, and Leiden University, their liberal arts colleges only accept 200 students a year, half of which are reserved for Dutch students. So half Dutch, half international. So you really only have about 100 seats available to international students. But again, it's a really great opportunity to experience a liberal arts curriculum in Europe.
Amazing. Moving further north, what does it take to prepare for a top UK university, Sam?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So the foundation for a strong application at a top UK university is academics. There's really very little flexibility in terms of entry requirements for grades and subjects studied at high school. So say, for example, if a student wants to apply for economics at Oxford, the minimum requirement will be that they're expected to achieve an A star and 2 A's in their A levels with further maths. Or if they're on the American curriculum, 5s in their APs with AP Calculus. Or for IB, an overall score of around 40 with 766 in their HLs, including Math AA HL. And this is the same for the majority of subjects in the UK. So if a student wants to apply for medicine, they have to have studied biology and chemistry. If they want to apply for computer science, they have to have studied maths and physics. But course selection and grades, they really only form the base of a strong application. So on top of that, students have to build a narrative around their subject that demonstrates how they've explored it beyond the classroom. And the main way to do this is through extracurricular activities. But in contrast to the US, these have to be subject specific. So say, for instance, a student applying for medicine, they should undertake an internship at a healthcare facility, or an architecture student should attend a design program, or an economics student should conduct a research project. And this is especially important for the top universities like Oxford or Cambridge, Imperial, LSE, where applicants will be quizzed on their subject knowledge in interviews and entrance exams. And just as a final point with entrance exams, the UK doesn't have a general standardized test, but students for certain subjects do have to sit entrance exams. So for law students, they have to do the LNAT. For medicine, they have to do the UCAT, and they're expected to score between, say, 650 and 700 in that exam. And then when it comes to Oxford and Cambridge, they have entrance exams for every subject. And it's important to note that for all of these entrance exams, students can only sit them once. So preparation is vital for that. But ultimately, a strong application for the UK is all about academics.
Amazing. And is the application process changing?
Yeah, so for the last 30 years, the UK application has pretty much stayed the same. Its main component has been a personal statement of approximately 600 words, which gives students the opportunity to demonstrate their academic journey or explain their extracurricular activities, their goals, to demonstrate critical thinking abilities. And this form of the personal statement offers students a lot of freedom to craft their narrative around their strengths. It has no specific prompt. There's just a collection of questions they're offered, which they can consider when writing, but none of those questions are actually necessary to answer. However, this is going to change in the next couple of years. So while there hasn't been a specific date set for this change, there have been a series of consultations, out of which it's been confirmed that the current personal statement will be replaced with shorter questions that look at topics such as motivation to study a degree, the the academic preparation for a course, and the preparation through other activities. So these are only 3 that have been confirmed so far, and it's likely more will be added. But what this means overall is that students in the coming years won't have the same freedom with UK applications that they currently do. Instead, there will be expectations on them to demonstrate a more balanced profile through a variety of activities.
So moving a little bit more towards the US model.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, very good. Now, Shafiq, you also grew up in Dubai, but you chose to study in Canada. Why?
So yes, testing, yes. So much like Ishan, I am a Dubai kid as well. I grew up here and I went to Canada for university. The reason I chose Canada was mostly because there was a guaranteed pathway for citizenship and permanent residency after university. But I do think that there's a big challenge when it comes to Canada is that there's a large misconception about the university structure. So when you're doing research for universities, you're going to find that across the board, you're going to get different stats. If you look at the acceptance rates for a lot of these universities, like UBC, for example, is like 49% last year. University of Toronto is 43% last year. McGill is 47% last year. That's a very high acceptance rate. So when you're looking at these, a lot of people think that getting into Canada is actually quite easy, but that's actually far from the truth. When you start looking at very specific subjects like computer science, engineering, math, for example, you're going to find that a lot of these subjects are more competitive the more specialized you go. For example, Waterloo has about 4.3% acceptance rate for their computer science subjects. And even then, there is the whole application process. Canada itself, because of the provinces, they have a very decentralized application process. You'll find that every university is looking for something very specific. Like UBC is very extracurricular focused. McGill is very academic focused. You're going to find that application timeline is going to be very different for every single universities. And you're going to find that for every program that you apply for, some schools will have very specific requirements. Not every school will have, for computer science, for example, not every school will require it, but like Waterloo's a computer science program, chemistry is going to be a subject. So your subject choice matters. So the biggest hurdle for most applications is diligence and like planning. You have to do a lot of planning. And also just to touch on that as well, there are also some programs which is first come, first serve. So it's really important that you apply early in the process, because when it comes to application times, a lot of people apply around November and December, and you'll find that if the application slots are already fulfilled, you might not be able to apply for them anymore. So it's really important that you plan from the very beginning which universities and make a good strategic plan about where to apply.
Amazing. A lot of students are drawn to the US because of co-ops, internships, study abroad. Do those exist in Canadian universities as well?
Yes, definitely. So in Canada is very, very big about experiential learning. You're going to find that when you're applying, that there's going to be a co-op option when you apply. And you don't necessarily have to pick it from the very beginning. A lot of universities have this option from your second year or your third year. You can always apply for it. The good thing about Canada is that there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to applying. A lot of schools have a very on-off option that you can do. So you could be studying for 4 months and then working for 4 months. You can take an entire year off if you want to study and then just to work. The good thing is also that these are paid work experiences. So you get paid and you get credit for them. So you have the option of kind of changing depending on how you want to do it based on certain industries, based on your academic studies. If you decide to change your majors, your co-op options can also change. A lot of the universities in Canada are very well connected. So they actually have a variety of options. So for Waterloo's program, for example, you have 4 months working, 4 months studying. And so by the end of your 4 years, you'll be working with about 5 different companies across different industries, which is valuable work experience when you graduate.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that experience. Back to the US now. Ukasha, why does the US remain the preeminent destination for international students for undergraduate study?
That's, I think, the perfect question to ask after some of the great points my colleagues made about the UK, Europe, and Canada, all worthwhile locations. So the US is home to 1 million international students that are housed across 3,000 institutes of higher learning. The U.S. at its center places the student. The aim is holistic development and multifaceted growth for students. It's not a sort of a tuition-based structure, which requires students focus on like a single discipline. It's really sort of diverse in the way that it allows students to focus on different disciplines. And it is in recognition of this fact that international applications to the US doubled over the last 4 or 5 years. So there's that. And it's also important to recognize that at its very center, again, at the core of the American educational experience, is flexibility. I personally don't know many 14 to 16-year-olds who can confidently say, I haven't come across them in the last 4 or 5 years, who can confidently say that, you know, they've figured everything out. They know exactly what they want to do for the next 4 years and perhaps the rest of their career. And this is where the US excels. It allows students to pair computer science with economics, history with philosophy, healthcare with business. So it allows for a high degree of flexibility. In fact, a full third of applications that go into the US are undecided in terms of major. Another third of students change their majors when they enroll at university within 2 years of being there. So the multidisciplinary or the interdisciplinary approach is really core to the US experience. Additionally, these offerings are backed up by a deep level of resources. This includes internship opportunities, co-op opportunities, learning communities, and research as well, which is big. Let's focus on research for a bit. US universities invested $100 billion in research over the last year alone, which is 3 times as much as the next country. Johns Hopkins invested $3 billion in research. All this money goes towards, better labs, more professors, better equipped students, better tech, and all of this contributes to, some of the most qualified undergraduates in the world and the highest paid as well. So for example, Harvey Mudd graduates in engineering, which is not a university many people have heard of, but Harvey Mudd graduates from engineering can earn somewhere around 112,000 USD. UIUC graduates in computer engineering can earn anywhere around 110,000 USD. So it's very rewarding in return on investment perspective. It's also important to note that they're generously backed up by the OPT program, which allows students to stay up to 36 months after graduating, and international students and getting work experience. So that's also a big competitive advantage compared to other regions. And finally, scholarships. This is big often for many, many families, for myself included. It's the most generous country in the world for that. The most wealthiest universities are generally in the US. A full 20 universities allow for full cost of attendance scholarships based on demonstrated financial need for international students. This includes University of Chicago, Emory, and so forth. And so many universities, dozens, also allow for merit-based scholarships, again, open to international students. And many of our students received these full cost of attendance scholarships to USC, NYU, Boston University, just to name a few. I'd like to mention 3 of my students here as well, Sarah, Dhruv, and On, who just between the 3 of them have a total of 1 million USD in scholarships. So, yeah.
Incredible work. Thank you. Now we know why students want to go to the US. If they want to prepare adequately, Aisha, when should they start doing so?
Yeah, that's a very popular question. Look, preparing for and applying to US universities is a 4-year process. From the very first day of high school, university admissions officers will be scrutinizing the record of your extracurricular involvement, down to the number of activities that you take, how many hours you're actively involved in those activities, even the weeks per year that you're committed to those activities. They will question your quantifiable impact in those clubs. It's not just about the leadership opportunities that you're in, but what have you managed to achieve in that time frame? Were you simply the president of the Eco Club, or were you able to launch an e-waste recycling initiative that collected over 40 tons of old, computers and cell phones, the way one of our students, Riva, did? Think of your first day in high school, I would say, as your first time on stage. You know, the curtains are drawn open and the spotlight is panned on you. Everyone's looking